And we are live. Welcome to the Liberalist channel. I'm today's host, the outcentrist. You may call me AC for short. I'm the moderator of the debate. We have two guests tonight to debate the topic of what is the role of religion in a secular state. Our guests tonight are Benedict XVII and Cooper the Intellectual. Links to their channels are in the details. As this is an informal debate, I expect civil discourse and my input to be minimal. Avoid interrupting each other and no ad hominem, pretty standard. Guys, would you like to introduce yourselves and to the audience the positions of which you are arguing for? I'll begin with you, Benedict.
Sure, I'm Benedict XVII. Just a culture commentator on YouTube. I'm involved with the Liberalist project, and I'm especially interested with the role of religion in a secular society. So to introduce my view, I'd like to begin with a point of scripture that my namesake Pope Benedict XVI made in his classic work, Spirit of the Liturgy. And in talking about the Exodus story, he talks about how when Moses goes to Pharaoh, he's actually very explicit. He says, "Let my people go into the desert so that they may worship God." And this is a point that's often passed over. We talk about the liberation of the slaves, and there's this big emphasis on liberty. But there's also this big emphasis on worship. And I think, and Pope Benedict XVI made this point, that liberty, for the religious, liberty is connected to worship. So liberty isn't this static thing that we accrue. Liberty is always ordered to something. And so that's what I think I'd like to see in general in the liberalist movement, in liberal society, is we often talk about how do we get freedom, how do we maintain freedom, but we always have to remember that it's ordered towards something. And for religious people, it's often ordered to how do we serve God. And so in a liberal society, we recognize secularism as the best way to organize society. But what I'd like to argue about secularism is that secularism works best when we emphasize its role in protecting religious freedom, the freedom to worship, the freedom of religious expression, and that oftentimes that gets lost.
Okay, is that it? Thank you, Cooper. And now your turn to introduce yourself. Thank you very much.
I'm Cooper the Intellectual. As is Benedict, I'm a cultural/political commentator, quite new to YouTube, and I will be arguing from an atheist/secular perspective. I mean, obviously we're both secularists, but more of an atheist perspective on this issue. I'm afraid I won't be arguing as eloquently as my opponent will be, nor will I be quoting from scripture. Nonetheless, basically, I'm going to, as it pertains to the U.S. Constitution, I'll basically be arguing from the, or rather, arguing for the ideas that are set forth in the Establishment Clause. I'd also emphasize freedom of religion, of course, even though, of course, I support both. But I would in fact emphasize more religion and freedom to freedom from belief. Really, that's it.
All right, thank you. Your audio is breaking up a little bit. So next time, if either of you audio breaks up, remind the other to repeat themselves so the audience can hear it. Does either of you have a question to begin to ask each other?
Okay.
If you do, Cooper, you may begin.
I didn't hear that. Did you say I would ask the first question?
Yeah. Does either of you have a question to ask each other to begin with?
I guess I'll begin. So, stance on same-sex civil unions and adoptions, because I won't ask you on same-sex marriage because I assume you're against it. But what's your stance on civil unions and adoption and same-sex adoptions?
Sure. So my position with that is that what we talk about when we mean same-sex unions and same-sex adoptions is often government recognition of it. And if if we're going to talk about why does the government recognize certain relationships and not other ones, then we have to ask what the purpose of it is. And I think the purpose for why government has always recognized marriage has been that it's seen childbirth, and the raising of children as a proper good for society. Now, a homosexual relationship, however loving it may be between the homosexuals, is simply not that kind of relationship. It's a different kind of relationship. That doesn't make it less valuable in certain ways, but it does mean that it's something wholly different than what I would argue marriage is. So I would say that it should not be recognized, and I would argue against same-sex adoption because I think men and women are different, and that the role of a mother and father cannot be replaced by someone of the opposite gender. There's something distinctly feminine about motherhood and something distinctly masculine about fatherhood that you couldn't have someone of the opposite gender doing. So I guess to answer your question, my stance would be against both. And I think the important thing to see there is that it's not a discrimination against homosexuals. It's a discrimination against, that relationship. And by discrimination, we're saying it's different than what a marriage is. And so it has a different role to play in society. Am I coming through?
May I answer? Yes. May I answer?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. I was just gonna say, the first part was about civil unions. Now, okay, I understand where you're coming from with your marriage argument, but what's your contention with civil unions? These are it's not like sanctioned by a religious organization. And I'll get back to my other points after you respond to that.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess then the question is, what's the difference between civilly sanctioned union and a civilly sanctioned marriage? It sounds like it sounds like we're just using a different name for the two things.
I was talking about unions that aren't like sanctioned by a church, by a religious organization. That they're different.
Right. I mean, I guess to further explain what I'm saying is, if we were to say that there should be something as same-sex unions, then the question is, what other kind of relationships should we have as some form of civil union? Would very good friendships, roommate relationships,
right, but there's a much different aspect, isn't there? It's a romantic or a sexual relationship, which is
right. But is it the role of the government to keep track of romantic relationships? I mean,
well, no. It's purely voluntary for the same-sex couple, right? It's not like the government is forcing same-sex couples to register in a civil union. It's just, would you personally allow the option for same-sex couples to enter into it?
I mean, I guess my question is, why should the government have? I mean, well, to get to the heart of your question is, if two men or two women wanted to live together, wanted to have sex with each other, and wanted to live their lives together, whatever my personal religious convictions about same-sex unions, legally, I think that should be allowed. The question is whether that's a relationship that the state should have an interest in codifying in some way, in the same way that opposite sex marriages are.
Okay, I see your point there, but would it? I sort of see a double, because you say that, well, heterosexual marriages should be allowed because their purpose is to children, on the human line, if you will. But
well, I wouldn't say that's their only purpose.
But what if the heterosexual marriages that do not produce children? What of those? I mean, technically, under I may be wrong with what your definition is here, but under your definition, would that just be classified the same as a homosexual relationship if no children are being produced? I may be misrepresenting you. Just correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, I think there are some differences. A homosexual relationship is intrinsically sterile. I mean, by the nature of the two sexes, they can't produce children. Oftentimes when sterility is an issue in a heterosexual marriage, it's because of disease or accident or something like that, or because of age. So for me, it's a difference between intrinsic and extrinsic, right there. But I mean, I think the broader question here is, what role does the state have in marriages, completely? Should we have civilly sanctioned marriages at all?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, I don't see a reason for the state to sanction marriages at all. But I'm just saying, sanctioned by the state, why should homosexual marriages not be? Then I have another question for you on the same point. Is it? It's linked in government's role to continue and to continue procreation.
I would argue yes. I think the continuation of the people, if you will. Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I mean, the question is why do we have a government? And I mean, the reason we have a government is, to protect our rights. Why do we want our rights protected? Because we think it's a good thing to have, because we recognize it's conducive to life, and whose lives, our lives, and those of the people around us that we care for, and that includes our children. Was that coming through?
My mic just cut out. Yeah, I did. Sorry, my mic just cut out. Okay, well, I see where you're coming from. I would also say, so back to the point about the heterosexual marriages that don't produce children. What of homosexual marriages that obviously but adoptions also in vitro fertilization? Would those? Sorry, not adoption, because I know you already stated your position on that. But what of in vitro fertilization?
I mean, again,
would you find value in homosexual relation or marriages that produce children through in vitro fertilization?
Well, I mean, I guess my position on in vitro fertilization is that I find I think it's problematic when we start separating children from the sexual act, and that's why I reject in vitro fertilization for homosexual couples and heterosexual couples. Now, the question is, should it be illegal? I mean, I don't know. That is kind of a gray area for me. But I do think when we start separate. Sorry?
I would just point out, like, not to get too effective in vitro fertilization through a homosexual couple. So, I mean, I don't think I've turned out that bad. I mean, I'm not using that as some sort of identity politics thing to refute your point, but I'm just saying, is there no value in those kinds of relationships or in vitro fertilization at all, for that matter?
No, I mean, I think there's tons of value that's that can come out of it. I do think homosexual relationships are there is a value there. I mean,
didn't catch that last thing. Homosexual relationships or what? I didn't catch that. Sorry.
I said there's a value there. I mean, I think what do we value most in this life? I mean, we value the virtues of courage, of love, of of really putting down one's life for another person. And there, in the homosexual people and relationships that I've seen, I think those things are present. The question is, for me, it's not whether these relationships are valuable. It's what kind of relationships are they? Because I also think those things are present in the relationship between a mother and her child, between a father and his child, between two very good friends. And I mean, I think that one of my favorite books is Brideshead Revisited. And in that book, you have the phenomenal relationship between Charles and Sebastian. That's much more interesting than the romantic subplot that comes later. And in that book between Charles and Sebastian, there is this kind of unresolved question of, was their relationship sexual or erotic, or was it simply friendship? And I think sometimes it's hard, there is a difficulty to tell between the two. And that's why I would classify a homosexual relationship as a form of friendship much more so than I would, classify it in the same way as I would classify a heterosexual marriage.
Okay, I see your point. Someone in the chat just said that it sounds like I'm debating live from Antarctica. So is my audio actually that bad?
I can hear Ben fine, but it's your audio is having some problems. How's mine?
Mine?
Yeah, Cooper. Yeah, yours is having some trouble on my side.
Oh, well, that's
do you want to?
I mean,
try
I'm right
leave
next
and
to my mic. So
are you okay, or is it your microphone? Do you think?
No, my microphone's right in front of me, so it can't be that. It's probably just my internet connection, to be honest.
Yeah, it could be you, because I think I can hear Ben fine at the moment. Am I okay? Is my voice okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
All right, thank you. Well, do you think? Well, is it bad enough that you want to leave and rejoin, or do you think you want to continue, gentlemen?
I think occasionally I might have to ask Cooper to repeat something, but I think we're here now.
You think it's
let's
acceptable?
muddle through it.
Yeah.
Okay. Apologies for the delay, gentlemen. Continue.
Yeah, I'm not going to drop out, but I was just the same thing is happening with Benedict, but yeah, I think it should be fine. But anyway, I'll continue with my point, which was that I definitely see where you're coming from, but I find it sort of patronizing to say that homosexual relationships are akin to friendships. But aside from that point, that's not really a policy point. Aside from that, I would say, if it's the government's place to end marriages, why should it not be to endorse homosexual marriages? I mean, I don't care. My preference is as to whether government endorses marriages or not. But I think that if they endorse marriages, all consenting marriages between two people should be allowed. That's my view. Then I had one other point that I just forgot. Oh yeah, right. Well, same-sex marriage has been legalized in I don't know how many countries, but I can name the UK, Australia, Ireland, the United States. Has it had a bad effect on a non-beneficial effect on these countries?
Well, I mean, I think in many ways it's too early to tell. I mean, the effects of things on, sexual relationships are things that will take generations to really see. That being said, I do think there are some worrisome trends that you do see in these countries. I mean, if we look at the
what do you mean by trends?
Well, I mean, I think if we look at the Nordic countries, particularly, not to say it's not happening anywhere else, but it seems much more pronounced there, is the fact that people, whether heterosexual or homosexual, aren't getting married. You're simply not seeing people getting married.
I think this is. I don't think this has to do with gay marriage. I think this is just simply a millennial phenomenon.
I mean, it's possible. But I think we couldn't discount the idea that, in a sense, if you water down, and by the way, I should say I don't think gay marriage is this singular threat to to the idea of marriage, by itself. I think it's one among a number of different things. I think contraception, no-fault divorce, all of these have been, tragedies for human relationships in general. And I think, it's kind of a combination of this, this kind of deadly cocktail that has kind of killed human intimacy in a lot of ways. We make jokes about Japan as the sexless country, but I mean, it is a real thing, and it's a sad thing, and I think it's that's something that we have to worry about as to whether the West of the Western world will follow that way.
Okay, a lot of that just cut out, but I'll just address what I heard. I think I heard you make some sort of point about like watering down the definition of marriage. I think
Sorry, you.
Yeah, I think it's his connection. I think he should try leave, maybe reboot and come back because I can hear Ben fine.
Okay, you want me to reboot and come back?
Yeah, and if you can't hear us, but we can hear, and I can hear Ben, I think it's your connection.
Okay, I will be right back.
All right, see you in a minute. Right, while she's away, blood sport.
Okay. Now the hard-hitting questions.
Yeah, no, I'll do a Kathy Newman. So what are you saying is, yep, he's back. All right.
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me a bit better?
Still cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, I think there might be something to do with your internet connection, because I think I can hear Ben fine now, and I think Ben can hear me fine. So that leaves you as the culprit, so to speak.
All right, I'll tell you.
Yep, and he's out again.
Off again. Once more. I'll turn off my internet. Back in like 10 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Right. Anyway, yep. Let's keep the audience busy, because we got 14 people looking at us at the moment.
Right. So I mean,
yep. Continue.
Oh, sorry, you had a question.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna ask you to tell us something about yourself rather than going on to debate questions while he's away. Oh, he's back already. That's quick. That was quicker than I anticipated. Right. Back. Hello, Cooper.
Hello.
So for Cooper's benefit, I'll recap what I said, so hopefully he hears the other half. And essentially what I was saying was...
Could I just address the last thing that I heard?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you said something about like watering down the definition of marriage, and this is why millennials aren't, or this is like a factor in why millennials aren't getting married, or they have a lower instance of getting married. I think this has nothing to do with gay marriage. And plus, would these millennials like be dissuaded by the fact that, as you say it, the definition of marriage is being diluted? Why would this be a factor in the decreasing amount of marriages between millennials?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at all these different things that I mentioned, contraception, divorce, I do think same-sex marriages are part of that. There is this trend into making a sexual relationship into an economic relationship. There's this, it's a business proposition. It's no more, this sacred ritual. It's a contract. And I think that's why millennials aren't into it. why enter into this contract? And so, part of that is that I think we've done a bad job of explaining what marriage is, and why marriage, is so much more than a contract. It's this idea of laying down your life for your partner, and it's a life creative relationship. And again, this is kind of from a religious perspective. So it's I kind of like to get back to questions about the government, but religiously we talk about the human being being in the image of God, and marriage, the relationship between a man, a woman, and the child they create is perhaps the relationship that's most like God, because it's the only life-creating relationship. In that process, man and woman image God in creating life. And I think, that's a message that, a lot of millennials, and in this I include religious millennials, even Christian millennials, aren't hearing about marriage. That's simply not what many millennials think about when they think about marriage.
I wouldn't say there's any how do I put it? I wouldn't say there's any intrinsic there's no like intrinsic bad nature to the whatever the latest version of marriage is. I really don't find any large problems in it. I respect your opinion, but I don't see any large problems with the current marriage culture. I mean, people are still getting married. People are still having children. I
agree with you that that there may not be an intrinsically bad nature, but if that's the best thing you can say about marriage, that there's no intrinsically bad nature, then is that really going to be a way to, encourage millennials into it?
I mean, I don't encourage millennials into it, because there are always going to be people who will get married, and there's always going to be a sufficient amount of people to continue on the human race. I mean, that's my view.
I mean, perhaps, but I mean, if we look at demographic data from Western countries, not to make the alt-right's point for them, but I mean, Western countries, which tend to be more secular countries, have fallen, behind in the replacement rate.
Oh, this is true. I would agree, and there's certainly a threat of mass immigration in European countries, and non-Europeans outnumbering Europeans. There's certainly this problem, but I wouldn't link it at all to marriage or to secularism, for that matter. I'd link it to the policies of European countries individually, and to the European Union itself, which is a completely separate problem. And I wouldn't say that these problems are brought about by secularism, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess I have a question for you, and I'd like to hear your perspective on, as liberalists, we hold freedom as, this, kind of the crowning purpose of what a government is, like defending individual rights and protecting freedoms for everybody. What do you think freedom is ordered towards for the individual?
Do you have a question for me? Because I have one. I basically just have one more question for you.
Oh, did you not hear that?
No, I didn't.
Okay. My question is, if we believe freedom is so important, and the role of government is to provide people with their freedom, what ought people to do with freedom? What should people do with their freedom? I guess what I'm saying is,
what to do with their freedom?
Yeah. Why do we want freedom as individuals? What should we do? what is freedom ordered
What
to?
should we do with it? People should do whatever they would like to do with it as long as they are not harming anyone. Much my I know it's probably very unchristian of me, but I pretty much I come from a sort of libertarian standpoint on individual Western nations, that people should do with their lives whatever they want. Of course, certain things would be better if people, certain decisions would be better for people if they made them, but I don't want government. I think we should definitely agree on this. I don't want government enforcing or recommending, certain lifestyles to choose. I simply don't think it's that effective or needed.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I wouldn't want the government to do so either. But when you said that people would be better off if they make certain decisions, clearly you must have some meaning behind the word better. So what do you mean that it would be better for someone to do something?
Well, better decisions as they pertain to marriage, I would say it's if more intelligent.
Not just about marriage in general, or not just about marriage, but in general. I guess in my question, like, what does better mean to you?
Oh, well, better to me means helping the economy and society as a whole. Starting up one's own business, being an community. These would be better things than just sitting around at home doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I don't think that comes from any sort of religious standpoint. I think that just comes from a practical standpoint. It's more practical, and it's just patently better for society if people.
Sorry, you cut out there.
Do something. I was just saying it doesn't come from a religious standpoint. It comes from a practical standpoint that it's couches and.
Cooper, you're cutting out really badly. You're cutting out quite badly. I can't hear you.
Oh, that's unfortunate. So what do you want me to do?
Do you have an option to? I've got it here because I'm the host, but I don't know. Do you have one to adjust your bandwidth usage at the top? Do you have one right at the top?
Option to do
adjust your bandwidth usage. Can you turn that down if there's?
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, yeah. I'll
try do that.
What do you want?
Turn it down.
Do you want me to put it low or very low?
Sorry.
Or audio? Do you want me to put it audio only or very?
On mine it says limit bandwidth, and you can turn that down. And I turned mine down, and it helped my audio earlier. Have you got a similar setting on your side that you can do?
Yeah.
It should say adjust bandwidth.
Adjust bandwidth, and then.
I threw mine on to audio only, so if you want to try.
Okay.
Yeah, try that.
I turned it on to audio only.
Okay.
Okay. So is it any better now? Carry on.
Okay. So what I was saying is that my idea of better decisions for people to make does not come from a religious standpoint, but from a practical standpoint, because I think that it is practically and patently better for people to, get off their couches, do something good for society and for their community, like starting up their own business, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me better?
I think you're better already. Actually, I think that helped a lot.
Oh wow.
I guess yeah, and I mean I think you're right. There's certainly a practical aspect to that, but I mean what I also think is that it demonstrates a kind of understanding of what the human person is. When you say it's better for someone to get off their couch and participate in their community, and that it's better for society, you have an understanding of an individual as someone who exists in society, who exists in community with other individuals. So when we talk about the individual as, and we talk about what the individual wants, we have to also have that dimension in mind, that the individual is a communitarian being, that he participates in society. And so what is best for the individual often deals with how can the individual best participate in society. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And so that's where my concerns about in vitro fertilization and contraception, come from. It's questions like,
I would object to that because
Hello, Cooper, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Sorry, I was going to say not doing contraception or not participating in vitro fertilization is not something that would fall under my bad decisions category. That's my indifferent category, pretty much. I would be indifferent to people, using contraception or using in vitro fertilization for their children. I'm simply indifferent to that.
Okay. I mean, yeah, what I think is important here is that we might disagree on particular aspects, particular things that we might consider good or bad for the human person. But I think the fact that we understand the human person as a being in community, someone who cares for the welfare of society, because in a sense he is a part of that society, is important for us and is important for the liberalists as a whole, because in many ways that's what separates us from libertarians, for example, or the anarcho-capitalists. We recognize that the individual is not self-enclosed, that there are aspects of himself that he decides, but he also participates in this larger society. And so there's this, think of our five senses, like they look outwards, and they bring the outside into us. We are formed by our surroundings. Yeah.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask it? Because obviously yours is not, if I understand correctly, then your rejection to gay marriages and IV, etc., is that homosexual marriages have a negative impact on society, right? Is that correct? Or do you think it has a negative impact to children raised by homosexual couples, for instance? Can you clarify on that? Thank you.
I mean, very broadly, I would say.
Sorry, no, go on.
Sorry. Very broadly, I would say it has a negative impact in society because we lose kind of the uniqueness of the man-woman relationship, and I think it also makes it harder for friendships to develop between two men. C.S. Lewis talked about this, back, in the 20th century, but I mean, it's a reality now. Whenever you see two male friends on TV, they're always labeled as gay. And I think this is actually very damaging to intimacy between men. So I'd say yes, I mean, I do see kind of collateral damages to society. I think it's damaging to children, because of the unique roles a mother and father plays. But most of all, I think it's damaging to the individual. And to a certain extent, yes, the individual has rights. The individual has the right to put himself in situations he might in situations that might be harmful to him if he so chooses. I'm a smoker, so I'm I'm sympathetic to that. But the I think the question is, do we really understand what sexuality is, or are we allowing the left to kind of dictate, and by the left I'm talking about the progressive left, like the alphabet soup of LGBTQ and stuff. Are we allowing that to kind of dictate our understanding of sexuality, or is it really based in kind of fundamental truths about human beings and what they are?
But where do you draw that seeing some other people be intimate would cause harm to heterosexual couples then? Because ultimately, isn't it just some other people doing their thing?
Right. So I mean, like I said, I mean, I don't think we should bring back sodomy laws. Like, I don't think we should criminalize it. But the question is it a marriage?
No, but how does that relate back to the state? So what should the state do about it? Do you think the state should have a hand in other words, in intervening this, or what is your position on that then?
No, I mean, I don't think the state should criminalize homosexuality.
So I was just trying to relate it back to the states, because obviously the debate should be on secularism on the state rather than specifically just gay marriages as a whole. So I'm trying to relate it back. Sorry, just trying to wheel it back towards the discussion.
Yeah, sorry about sort of dragging on about that.
No, not at all. But just want to relate it back to what the state's position should be.
Mm-hmm.
Continue, guys.
So I mean, I guess
well,
kind of.
I would just say I think.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I think we sort of agree on. Obviously, we agree on if the state should be secular or not. But I think we should just sort of be ironing out the detail, or not ironing, or you know, it's the details of how a secular state should function. Issues such as gay marriage and abortion, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, and I think it's interesting when you say we both agree on what, that the state should be secular, because we do agree on that. But that raises the question, what do we mean by secular? Because there's a lot of differences between the way between French secularism, British secularism, American secularism. So I mean, I think that's a good question. Like, what do you mean when you say secular? Would you consider the British system secular?
Yes, I'm advocating for what I at least think is British secularism. I mean, I don't feel as if I think I'm advocating for what would be British secularism, but I also would just refer back to the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. I mean, I don't think we should meddle in the affairs of religion, nor should we establish a religion and everyone participating in a religion.
So I'm not sure if I caught all of that, but I guess you're saying that you like a lot of aspects of British secularism, but you don't like the idea of an established church. So you like their religious laws, say on religious freedom, the way the Brits do it, but the idea of having the Queen as the head of the church is something you don't like. Am I correct in that?
Oh, I mean, I'm indifferent to the royal family. I mean, I don't think it has any practical use, but I don't really think I don't think it should be abolished. And obviously it's it's a boon to tourism, but that's sort of aside the point. I don't object to the Queen being head of the church, simply because I don't think the Queen has any influence at all in religious affairs, nor does she really influence the government.
Well, maybe
also speaking of secularism in Britain, I'm pretty sure the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's the leader of the Anglican Church, is like an agnostic not too long ago. So religion is much more watered down in Britain than it is in the United States.
Well, I just to defend the honor of the Archbishop of Canterbury, a position as a Catholic I never thought I'd be in. I'm not sure it was him. I think you might be thinking of the rector of the National Cathedral in the United States, who came out as an agnostic Christian. But AC, who's actually a Brit,
I'm unsure. I'll check that.
Might clarify those points for us. How about this? Suppose the next president of the United States, whoever he may be, or she, is a Catholic. Would you have an issue
isn't what?
Is a Catholic?
Oh, right. Okay.
Would you have an issue if if instead of a inaugural show or parade, he requested an inaugural mass?
An inaugural mass? No, I mean, well, on principle, I would. I mean, if I were president, I would not do that. On principle, I mean, I guess I object to it, but I don't like viciously object to it. I don't really find any use in like boycotting that. I really don't care.
Okay.
As long as his or her political beliefs do not directly interfere with what is the best for the nation. And also, may I just add on to that Archbishop of Canterbury thing? It is from The Guardian, which I will admit is not the most reputable source, but Justin Welby, who's the Archbishop of Canterbury, admitted to a BBC radio interviewer that he has moments of doubt of the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean,
that's what I read.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, yeah, I mean, if you want to take that as saying that he's an agnostic, I guess you could, I guess you could. I mean, it kind of sounds like
many.
Sorry,
You're breaking up again, Cooper. Can you turn your video? It's already off. I don't know what's going on, but your audio is still pretty bad.
I'm really sorry. My bandwidth is all the way down, so I really don't know what else. I'll close a few tabs actually.
You might have some adverts that's running a Bitcoin mine in the background.
Yeah, but I mean, I could see that as a you could call that a proof for the Archbishop of Canterbury's agnosticism. You might also say that it's kind of a dark night of the soul. Kind of this intense period of spiritual dryness that affects holy people.
Okay. Well, I don't really have much else to add on there. So, I mean, if AC, if you have another question, or I can introduce my last question.
Well, I was actually just looking up since you guys were talking about England. There's an openly gay bishop. I think it's Nicholas Chamberlain. Actually, yeah. What do you think about that, Sven? Because your argument were based on homosexuality have negative impact on society based on religion.
Well, I just to be very clear, I don't think it's not homosexuality. It's the homosexual relationships, or to be kind of more specific, the homosexual act itself that I more object to. People have same-sex attractions. I don't think that's anything they can control. I think it's something they have more control over than the Born This Way crowd suggests they do. But I think most people experience these things, and it's not something they feel they have a lot of control over. And so I think we ought to be very compassionate to those who experience those attractions. But to answer your question, I could be wrong, but I think in the Anglican Church, bishops are. I don't think they have to be celibate, but there is, for those with same-sex attractions and abstaining from same-sex relationships. And so for those who experience exclusively same-sex attractions, they do live celibate lives. So that, that gay bishop in England, I think, is actually a very, can be seen as a kind of a role model for how to live a celibate life. And it's funny that we, at the beginning we were talking about, the good of marriage in society, but I think we also have to talk about the good of celibacy in society, because I think that's another part of this. There is this life.
Sorry, the what in society? I didn't.
The role of celibacy.
Okay, celibacy.
purposefully abstaining from sexual relationships. And I think that's a good model for what I mean when I ask the question, what is liberty for? Because sexual relationships take a lot of time, especially healthy ones. Marriage, married people spend a lot of time and energy on each other and for each other. And the reason they do this is they're sacrificing it for a greater good. Celibates, and mostly I'm talking about priests. From my background, that's most of the celibate people I knew. But those who have chosen to live a life of celibacy don't have this constant reminder of a wife or a husband to remind them to lay down their life for another person. So the celibate person has to do it himself. And they're giving up kind of the joy of having a spouse, the joy of having children, in order to give themselves over to a larger family. And
sorry, you haven't finished. Continue.
And I think that's kind of the perspective we as liberalists should have. We don't like the alt-right because we don't believe that we should, in a sense, be married to our race. We don't like the progressives because we don't think we should be married to our sexuality or to our gender. We don't like nationalists per se because we're not married to our nation. In a sense,
we're against liberty because we're not married. We don't want to be married to Ayn Rand.
Exactly. So in a sense, liberalists are kind of political celibates. And so because we have this freedom from all these different attachments, the question is, what are we going to use this freedom for? Where are we taking this energy? And I think for the religious among us, that's one direction. But ultimately, for everybody, generally, I think it's culture. Liberalists, we can build up the culture of a society. That's why we want the government out. We believe in people. We believe in the community, the local community especially, and it's building. This building of a community of neighbors. And I think that's kind of what liberalists are for. We're pro-culture.
Well, I'm getting a disconnect between how gay marriages or gay relationship will have a direct negative impact on culture. I'm still not really getting the connection. Do you have any citation for that?
If you're looking for,
I didn't say in your perspective, but I don't see the specific connection other than based on your conception of religion and the whole the marriage between a man and woman thing.
Well, I didn't pull up any studies for this chat. And like I said, I don't know if the studies are out there simply because it is such a new issue in society. I think we forget, but when we were, I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm in my mid-20s, and when I was in elementary school, it was still much, an incredibly controversial thing compared to what it is today. So if you're looking for scientific studies, I don't know if they're out there because it's kind of so early, but for me, it's kind of the, if you will, anecdotal evidence of countries that have slipped into this progressive model that we see, especially in the Nordic countries. And again, I don't think it's homosexuality itself, but it's kind of the cocktail homosexuality comes with, the progressive view of sexuality.
Well, I think nobody would disagree that the progressive politics is pretty poisonous to society and have a negative impact.
Yeah,
I definitely do, but I just can't have yet to find a correlation or anything that a committed homosexual relationship would have a necessary negative impact on society. That was the point I want to raise. But I'm interrupting too much. I shouldn't be participating. I'll pass it back to Cooper. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, yes, I know firsthand how just cancerous progressive ideology is, seeing as I live in a very, 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 people would say liberal state, but it's not really liberal, it's progressive, as I live in a very, very progressive state. Also, as someone who's still in high school, I can just say that we're constantly pumped with progressive propaganda, pretty much most of the and one can easily be shamed for having a contrary opinion. I mean, just for the simple fact that I was against the movement of feminism, I've been constantly labeled a sexist, and for the fact for facts of just other principles that I would describe as liberal, I've been labeled as a sexist, racist, etc. Even though I'm far from all of those things. But yes, also just how much they push sexuality as part of one's identity. I don't think sexuality has to be like the foremost thing of one's identity. I think it's quite detrimental if it is. I think it just be a side note when one talks about one's identity.
Mm-hmm. And I think we also have to separate between sexuality and sexual orientation, because sexuality is a big part of kind of the human experience. But it gets locked into this box with sexual orientation, and so sexuality is just reduced to gay or straight or something in between. But really, what we're talking about with when we talk about sexuality is how do you relate to the world outside yourself. And I think that's a controversial thing to say, but I think there's something true to that, in that we need to there's kind of this sensation that that the world outside is very different than the world we have inside ourselves, and we have this feeling of disconnect, and it manifests itself in loneliness or anxiety, or kind of just this feeling that that we feel, I guess you could say, that we don't fit in the world, that for some reason something was wrong, something got twisted, as we were growing up, and I think that's kind of the experience we have of disconnect in the modern world. We have this incredible isolation, and kind of the task of the millennials and and the generations after us will be to reconnect with the world, to reconnect with our neighbors, to really rebuild culture.
I have nothing to disagree with there. I agree with. So, AC, do you have any other questions for us?
Well, because I think we've sidetracked onto, well, because we should relate this back to, because if we don't actually have any disagreement on the state should be secular, I don't think we actually have anything to argue about other than personal opinions. Okay. Yeah, I think there could be some curveballs, like for instance, that if you guys were arguing for like non-secularism, because the thing is, you can also argue for like other, like for example, like Islam and other things as well, because of this. If you are to argue for religious perspective, because obviously, whilst you guys are coming from a Christian perspective, there are also other religions in the game.
An atheist perspective.
Well, atheist. Yes, sorry. I mean the conversation-wise. Apologies. Not necessarily.
Right.
You yourself is a Christian, because there's also like other religions involved as well, and could potentially relating to the earlier thing on marriage, because you could say like those concepts of marriage predates religion. So to factor in that as your primary debate on whether or not the state should be secular, I think is kind of not necessarily the most important part, because I think do you agree or disagree that the concept of marriage predates religion, as well as being cross culture in other religions as well? This for either of you, whoever you want to answer. It's just a general question.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say the concept of marriage has predated religion, but I wouldn't say, you know, the definition as it is in the dictionary, or not even in the dictionary, just how people would define it today.
I mean, like ancient Chinese been getting married for like, you know, God knows 6,000 plus years, or up to 8,000 years.
Yeah,
so it predates most of the religion that you would be talking about these days that anyone still practices.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Sorry, that just threw you a curveball.
No, sorry. I thought Cooper was answering, but so I mean, I'd say.
Oh no, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I would say religion, marriage, definitely predates any particular religion. If you understand religion as kind of the relationship between man and God, whether or not you believe in God, but you know, this general concept of man trying to relate to something outside himself, I'm not sure if you'd say marriage predates that, but you know, I'd say it predates any particular religion, especially any that are still around today. But I guess Cooper, kind of going back to this relationship between religion and the state, you know, I think one of the areas of disagreement that often comes up is taxes. Do you think churches should be taxed?
Be taxed. I would analyze it on a case-by-case basis, but I mean, it's sort of a hard question, because if there's proof that they're doing you know, mostly charitable work, then I believe they should go untaxed, just as charities are. But I mean, I would generally be against taxation of churches, because I think that the government should not meddle in.
Sorry,
Cooper, you're breaking up again.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that I generally would say no, do not tax churches being meddling in religious affairs, which I oppose.
Okay.
Would you? I assume you would agree.
Yeah, generally. Now, to kind of flip it to the European standard, and I'm thinking of countries like Italy and Germany here. What do you think about tax money going to churches?
Well, that's certainly. No, I do not think tax money should go to churches. Again, I think that's too much meddling in religious affairs.
Okay.
I don't think it should go either way.
Okay. I mean, you know, there's definitely some consistency there. You know, I guess you have a very strong understanding of the separation of church and state. You know, that's what's coming across.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
That's my position.
Okay. So I guess a couple times you've alluded, especially in this last question, to the fact that, you know, churches have this charitable role in society. You know, and there's this idea that churches are good for society.
You cut out. I couldn't hear your question.
Sorry. You know, kind of in your answer to my last question, you noted that you know, a lot of churches do charitable works, and there seems to be this, you know, whether or not you personally are religious, you seem to agree that churches have a strong positive role in society.
Of course, I do think that a lot of churches have certainly a positive role in society, but I would separate community or society. I would separate community from state. obviously agree with.
Okay. But I mean, would you say? I mean, I don't know if you're. I use the common good, the term common good. Kind of when talking about the welfare of society. Would you say that the state has some kind of role in the common good of society? And insofar as churches are benefits to the common good of society, does the state have some interest there?
Well, of course, the state has interests in the common good of society, but I don't think that is the only option would be to support churches. I think that these two can be separate, as they should be. I think the churches should provide charitable good, and the state should provide good for society, but these should be separate. So I don't think the state has a particular interest in churches. As I think both can independently do their work in helping society.
Okay. I mean, I certainly wouldn't disagree with you that they can do their work independently. I mean, in the United States, where we have this separation, this very strong concept of separation between church and state, although it's much more modern than we kind of give it credit to. We clearly see that churches are able to function. But I think part of that has to do with the religious, diversity in the United States. And I mean, we may be a predominantly Christian nation, but we've always had, a lot of different Christian denominations. And many of our, kind of the earliest, if you want the earliest skirmishes or the earliest troubles in the United States context have always been, between people with different understandings of, the Christian religion. I guess, suppose the U.S. were more homogenous as far as Christian sect. I don't know if you want to say like 90 or 95%.
When you say homogenous, as in terms of Christian sect, do you mean homogenous as Christian or homogenous as Catholics and or Protestants?
Catholic, Lutheran, Anglican, or something. Would you say in a society where almost everyone was of a particular religion, that there'd be some role for the state in a sense that the separation between church and state ought to be less or would be more?
Well, I mean, certainly you have to judge things on a case-by-case basis, but I think hypothetically, I would still stay true to my principles and say that the church should stay as far away from helping churches or having churches help it as possible through tax. I mean,
okay. So an interesting issue that, I mean, it's kind of across the United States, but because in Maryland there is such a strong, kind of strong culture.
You cut out a bit.
Okay. Sorry. This is kind of another related question. I'm kind of just throwing a few different things to see how you apply your principles in different situations. So I want to talk about the question of school vouchers. I don't know if has that been a prominent issue where you're at? School vouchers.
School vouchers. Not really. I mean, the closest thing to that we've sort of had an issue with is charter schools.
Okay. But
in Massachusetts.
but I mean, if you're familiar with the concept, you know, so say that instead of, because public schools receive a certain amount of money per student that they receive, right? You know, and the idea is that each student has creates some kind of cost to the education system. So what a lot of what the Catholic schools in particular have argued is that, Catholic schools are providing a service to the government in educating students, and that way reducing the cost to the public schools. So because they're providing this service to the government, they should get the same the same resources that public schools do per student. I'm not sure about the finer details of the policy proposal, but from what I understand, that's kind of the basic idea. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I would have to go in more depth to this issue, but I mean, just sort of tentatively and on a principled standpoint, again, I would have to side with not interfering with Catholic schools. I mean, I think this is the same. I would treat Catholic schools just as I would treat private schools. I don't really think the state should, interfere with them at all.
Okay.
Right, guys. I've got a quick question on relating to religion and schools. Basically in Britain we have quite a problem that like faith schools, they are like Islamic faith schools, so they are hotbeds for like extremism, because they're poorly regulated. But on the other side, we do have like Christian schools and Catholic school that performs exceptionally well. On the basis of secularism, what are you guys' stance on it? Should a faith school that uses public funding be outlawed, or should they continue? And what are your solutions if you think they should continue? That's just a quick question not relating to Thank you.
Again, case by case basis. Obviously the like Catholic or other Christian denomination schools, faith schools in the UK aren't promoting hatred and violence, and Islamic schools are. I would say if any of these Islamic faith schools are getting public funding, they that have been proven to be preaching hatred and violence and jihad, stop receiving government funding.
But does that infringe your principle of secularism if it's receiving public funding, because then it's actually part of the state funding? Or do you think that is okay in your perspective?
I wouldn't have it receive public funding in the first place. But I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's what I meant. What is your ideal?
It's an Islamic school preaching. If it's preaching.
Well, obviously not all of them are, but some of them are. But just on the basis of your principles, if you don't think they should have any funding at all, then that's what I'm asking. And I know I'll Ben the same question. What does he think about faith schools receiving public funding on his perspective?
Oh, sure. Faith schools. I don't think faith schools should receive public funding. That's my point. That's my position.
Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding of secularism is much more of a religious pluralism perspective. So I think religious schools should receive public funding, and if that means obviously if there is an Islamic school, it too should receive public funding. The question is, does it become, a hotbed for radicalism? And then I think the question is, why is a school, public or not, becoming a hotbed for radicalism? I certainly don't think it's becoming that way because of the public funding.
But does that not contravene the principle of secularism? Because then it's state funding to promote the faith, because obviously they'll have classes to promote faith.
Well, I think you could get think Germany has a good way of doing this, and I mean, I criticize the German system a lot, but one thing I do like is that they do have kind of a tax for a national church, and I think Italy does this as well. And for the Germans, it's the Lutheran Church. For Italy, it's the Catholic Church. But you have an option to give this to, instead of donating it to the Lutheran Church or the Catholic Church, it can go to another religious domination. And I think possibly that could be the way it's done in Britain or the U.S., where in Britain, where it is an Anglican country, the taxes would go to support Anglican schools, unless someone marked differently to say, I'd prefer my tax money going to Catholic schools or something like that. Or you could even say that the standard would be that it would be divided. Each individual's tax money would be divided up among the entire school system, all the schools, unless they particularly requested it only be used for Anglican schools or Catholic schools or Muslim schools. So it's, for me, it's not so much that the government has to be completely separated from religion that way. For me, it's that the government can't impose religion on the individual.
But if they're actively funding religious activities, do you not think that violates the principle of secularism?
Right. So my perspective would be that, like, say I got my tax form, today, and I actually did pay taxes today, so it's kind of ironic. But suppose there was this box for you're being taxed $100 to support the education system. If you don't select anything, it will be given to whatever school needs it. But if you can request that this only be used for only secular schools, non-religious schools. You could also select that it only be used for Catholic schools or Anglican schools or Muslim schools. So there is a way that it's not forcing you, it's not taxing you into participating.
But isn't that the state getting more involved into religion rather than getting out of getting involved in religion in that sense? Then,
well, I guess
because then if you have like mass immigration, for instance, they will put all their funding into their own specific religious schools. Do you think that is healthy for society?
Oh, I think it would raise a lot of problems for Britain if something were like this, and it might cause enough problems in Britain to wake up the British people to saying, why is there so much Islamic immigration? Why have we done such a poor job in it? I mean, I use the term evangelize, but really what I want to say is Britannize kind of these subcultures that exist in British society, or at least that at least here in the States we hear about existing in British society. No-go zones in London like this. I haven't been to London, so I don't know if.
I think those are in. The only no-go zones I've heard about are in Stockholm and Gothenburg in Sweden. So I'm not sure about London. I assume AC could clarify that.
London, I don't really know if they're literally no-go zones, but they are enclave, so to speak. Yeah, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Also in Sweden, I think Malmo is one that's quite prominent. That's quite well noted. That has grenade attacks.
Malmo. Yeah. Children with AK-47s just roaming around the streets.
I don't know if that is really the case, but I've heard bad things. But
some Swedish newspaper, but yeah. Anyway,
secret Swede.
I had a question for Benedict. I saw it in the. Someone raised the point of should should satanic schools be receiving government funding in your opinion? That's not my point. That's someone in the chat.
Yeah, that would be a good question.
So there are a couple different ways to take this question. If in fact the government were to give funds to religious schools, I do think on one level, yeah. If there is like this kind of support for for a satanic school, there is something there to that. Like what it raises for me is, why are there so many Satanists in our society? What, frankly, what have Christians done wrong to allow?
Wait. Sorry. It's just that. Do you think Satanists are a burden to society?
Well, I mean,
should we hashtag gas the Satanists? No, I'm just kidding.
Satanist lives matter.
Yeah, hashtag Satanist lives matter.
Well, I mean, I think that's the other thing we have to ask about. It's like, what kind of Satanism are we talking about? Are we talking about LaVeyan Satanism? Are we actually talking about like demonic cults here? Or are we just talking about edgelord atheists? I mean, if we're really talking about satanic cults, then the question is Satanism a religion? In the same way that we might say Catholic or Catholicism, Islam, Anglicanism, Hinduism.
No true religion. Is this a no true religion fallacy?
No. It does raise. There is something to this, because at the center of all religions is this idea, that the true, the good, and the beautiful are transcendental properties of being. That is to say that, when we talk about being in itself, which is at one level what we mean by God, this is transferable with the term the good or the true and the beautiful. That's not the case in Satanism. Satanism is kind of an inversion of that. I mean, I wish we kind of had an exorcist on the line, because the exorcist would be able to kind of tell you more about kind of that demonic aspect. But the point about Satanism is really what I'd say is the dark side of failed liberalism, if you will. It's this idea that freedom not being oriented towards something, not being oriented towards improving society or dedicating one's life to the culture, to the people. What Satan wanted, religiously speaking, is he wanted his freedom. But for him, freedom meant freedom from God, like the source of being. So what does it mean to be free from being? Free from God? It's like a fish asking, what's freedom? Yeah, sorry, I did I cut out or?
No. I was just gonna ask you a question. So would you say that Satan was advocating for
Sorry?
Would you say Satan was advocating for negative liberty? He was asking for freedom from God.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, yes.
I know we're going up into the woods here. It's
that's kind of what I've been trying to get across about my position this whole chat, is that freedom is oriented towards action. There's this idea that freedom is kind of this neutral value, but that's not true, because freedom must be, freedom is only worthwhile if it's doing something, and so it's oriented towards actions, and actions always have a moral quality about them. You can think about it kind of like money. like a lot of people think money is kind of this neutral thing, but money is worthless unless you actually use it to buy something. And if you use money to buy something, I mean, there is a certain moral choice you make when you buy something. Maybe not always, but there are times when you could buy something immoral, or you could choose to donate your money. Like, so there is a moral quality to money, and similarly, a moral quality to freedom. And so the question is, how do we use our freedom? And what I see in an interpretation is that of the kind of story of the fall of Lucifer, is that if you want freedom just for itself, kind of this, it's kind of this self-love. We want freedom in order to give it away, to others, to our spouse, to our community, to our children. But if you want freedom just for yourself, it's this kind of selfish self-love, that I think that's kind of the moral of the story of the fall of Satan. So this was a large digression away from the question of whether Satanist schools should receive funding. But the point is that I don't think Satanism is a religion, in the same way that Christianity or Islam or Judaism or Hinduism are, because all these religions, in varying degrees, teach about giving your life away for others. Satanism, just tells you to love your own life.
Well, obviously I'm not a Satanist, is that teaching that you mentioned, that one should love one's own life, is that directly contradicting with, caring for others? I still think that is, those are not mutually exclusive. I think one can both love oneself and care for others. I think most people do, us included.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have to distinguish between like a positive self-image and kind of a negative self-love. Like, as a Christian, I believe we're made in, all human beings are made in the image of God. So insofar as I'm an image of the truly good, the truly true, and the truly beautiful, the fullness of being, yeah, I think I'm great. But it's, I think we ought to love ourselves for what we reflect, and whether that's, the culture we live in, or, or the God we worship. There's some sense that if we just love ourselves for ourselves, we kind of, it's kind of this inward, inwardness that, frankly, I don't think.
Does being an atheist inherently necessitate that you only love yourself and not anyone else around you?
No. I don't think that's the case.
Then there's no conflict between the religious or non-religious on that topic.
Also,
I don't think there's any conflict. I was talking. I thought we were talking about the difference between religion and Satanism in that last little section. But
okay. Well, I don't think any of us is. I don't think any of us specialize in Satanism to be able to defend the Satanist position. I'm sure if we request for it, someone can. So let's go back towards secularism and the role of religion in a general sense.
Okay.
Do you have anything else
to make
add?
one more point pertaining to that? It's just that. So the definition of religion is the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, God or gods. So I don't want to get back into the Satanism debate, but how is that contradictory to Satanism as an idea? I see where you're coming from. I certainly see where you're coming from. You're defining religion as it is defined in a Christian sense, but I'm defining religion as it is defined in an objective sense.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's the definition I used was a particularly Christian sense per se. But I mean, I think what I was getting at was that's the difference between, if you will, positive religions and other religions, like Satanism, if you want to put it that way. You could say they're all religions, but I think there is a qualitative difference between between religions that worship God and religions that kind of reject God, and do so explicitly. But I mean, I think we answered the question in the chat about Satanism, and whether
I think we should move on.
Yeah. So,
does anyone else have any other questions? Because I'm spent with questions. AC, do you have any?
Well, I'm Cooper. I think I think an interesting question would be that recently in the last couple of years, we've seen I've at least seen some articles for different people trying to start like churches of atheism, or like, yeah, or
the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
Well, I mean, that's more of an internet joke, but there have been some people that have actually.
That's basically just a meme.
Yeah, I mean, it's a meme, but there have
Church of Jedi.
Yeah,
that is an official religion in the UK.
I think so. I think so. I don't know whether we reverted it again or something, but I think it was at one point. Absolutely. I think it requires 5,000 or 6,000 people minimum to sign up to it for it to be legitimized.
Nice. Anyway, go on, Benedict.
Yeah. So what I'm talking about is some people have actually created like brick and mortar buildings, where they have, someone, it's set up like church, but instead of like a sermon, they have like TED Talks. These don't seem to have. My question is, these don't seem to have taken off in the same way that religions have. And I'm curious as to what if you had any thoughts as to why that might be.
Well, because I mean, I would say it's because if atheism is organized, which I don't think it should be, because it's the lack of a belief in God. It's sort of the antithesis of organized religion, I would say, to some degree. Not the antithesis, but it's definitely opposed to organized. If people are organizing on the basis of atheism, I mean, as a church, I mean, I think it's probably just a meme or a joke. Serious.
Sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. It sounds like an oxymoron. It's just.
Do you it's like having a restaurant that doesn't serve any food.
Right.
Exactly.
Do you think that poses, in some sense, a challenge, kind of for a strong secularist, or kind of an secularist perspective in organizing a government or a movement, if there is the sense that we don't have kind of a common cause to rally around, a common understanding of what human beings are in respect to the transcendental?
Well,
you're breaking up.
Sorry. Yes. Anyway, I would say that sorry.
Oh, so I was just saying that you were breaking up.
Oh, it's just because I paused speaking. Anyway, what I was going to say is that I think maybe to get your point, I think I don't think it has to think it inherently. I'm not trying to like offend you or anything, but I'm just saying I think inherently atheists tend to be more independent-minded people. Maybe not more, more independent-minded, but also sort of less trust in authority, especially in an organized sort of religion. So I don't think there's much demand or want for that kind of thing.
Okay. I mean, I guess what I'm getting across is, I see several roles, if you want to call them roles, of religion in society. There's this sense that there is a unity to a community that religion brings. Religion, I mean, more than anything else, seems to get people to care beyond their immediate circumstances. Some of the most successful aid organizations, in the third world are religious organizations, creating, hospitals, schools. There's
like the Salvation Army.
There's this drive, towards kind of a unity that religion provides, that aids towards the common good. And part of that, I would say, is that religion, and particularly Christianity, stabilizes nations, increasing peace and prosperity for everyone in those countries. So I think.
I mean, could I respond?
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna. I don't disagree with anything you've said there. I think, yes, definitely religion, and helping through charitable organizations like the Salvation Army, to some degree, perhaps it does help in unifying nations. But obviously, there's a flip side to that. Like, I bet you're more than familiar with the troubles of Northern Ireland. That's a case in which religion has divided. And specifically Christianity has divided, because you're talking about Christianity that has, united in times of crisis. But in other times of crisis, such as in Ireland and Northern Ireland, religion has divided.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the troubles, specifically, I think we also have to understand that might have been more political than religious per se.
Oh, no doubt.
I think one of the great IRA songs was something like, "So here's to those good Protestant men," talking about the Protestants who also allied themselves, with the Irish to fight off the British.
Oh yeah, of course.
But I mean,
it obviously was a political conflict that fell along rather religious lines, not completely, but mostly fell along religious lines as well as political lines.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think I'd agree that it definitely fell along religious lines. But I mean, I did a little bit of preparation, looking at different things. And one of the resources I saw was Charles Phillips and Alan Axelrod's Encyclopedia of Wars. And I was kind of interested in this question, like, does what when we talk about religion in society, does it typically bring more division or more peace and unity? And what they found was that out of 1,763 wars, only 123 of them were religious. Leading up, the conclusion being that the other ones were non-religious. And I don't know.
But I would also be interested to see how bloody those religious wars were compared to the non-religious wars.
Well, I mean,
because you have like the 30 Years' War, which is an incredibly states which were incredibly bloody. Obviously, if you measure up against all the other thousands of wars that were non-religious, of course, they won't. If you go on, like, the average religious war was probably a lot more bloody than the average non-religious war.
Well, I mean, perhaps, but when you take into account things like World War I, World War II, communism.
Of course.
I still think
Indeed.
I see this aspect of religion as aiding I'd say, I would go so far as to say that, some kind of religious ethos. I'm not saying a particular religion, although, I mean, I think I've made my own preferences obvious. But I would say that there is this, religious aspect of man, and that for the common, for the necessary conditions of the common good to be present, there needs to be this, feeding or this connection to this religious sense of man in society.
Do you think it's actually necessary, or do you think it's just a single form of how people can relate to each other? Because as you've said, that there are, like communism, for example, people can be united based on ideology as well. So do you think that's exclusively religious, that has the sense of identity, or do you think it could be anything?
Well, I think I think my point is that I think religion is necessary. Not necessarily any particular religion, but the fact that this religion sensibility of man is fed, and we see, and I think this happens two ways: either by a strong religious culture in a nation, I'm thinking about Poland or the United States, or by a national church, and ideally also a strong religious culture like England. Although I think that you see it kind of fading there.
So on that point, oh, sorry, no, you go. I'm just asking questions because.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we've been going for like an hour and 40 minutes. My computer's almost dead, as am I. So I'm gonna have to butt out right now. Sorry, I really enjoyed talking with you guys.
All right,
thanks so much for having me on.
All right, do you have a final statement
Benedict,
or anything to say before you leave?
And thanks.
Yeah, if we want to do like concluding comments.
Do a closing statement and then
I'll go first because I have to leave. So
all right, no problem.
Yeah, my closing statement is pretty much that I agree with probably at least 60% of what Benedict is saying, the role of secularism, but there's certainly quite a there that we disagree on, and of course I think the Liberalists provides a platform for people to have such civil discourse. You wouldn't see the like progressive or alt-right circles. So I really thank you. I'm humbled by the opportunity to do this with you guys. So I thank you a lot once again.
Yeah, and thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome,
Cooper. And
yeah, thank you, Benedict. Please, if you've been watching, please subscribe to my channel. I don't post that often, but I will definitely get back to posting soon. So thank you guys for having me on. Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you. See you later.
Good discussion.
All right, Ben, would you like to give your closing statement and then I'll just close the show?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think Cooper hit the nail on the head. We certainly agree on a lot. We both see a positive role for religion. Where we disagreed is he seems to take a much stronger stance on the separation of church and state, whereas for me it's the freedom of expression. That's really the hallmark of a secular state, and and I would argue that states where there's the wall between church and state is thinner still count as secular. I think we touched on a lot. We started early on questions like gay marriage and stuff, but I think it goes to show how many of these kind of particular topics that we talked about show how deeply politics and religion are intertwined, as much as we may try to separate them, that we can talk about them in relationship to all these different things. So I would also like to thank our moderator, AC. I'd like to thank the Liberalists for hosting us. And if you enjoyed this chat and heard something you like, I invite you to subscribe to the Liberalist, to Cooper the Intellectual, and to my channel as well. So thank you again.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And if you guys want to subscribe to those guys, then the links to their channels are at the description. Okay, have a good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening.